Back in January, I was playing Genshin Impact's Lantern Rite festival event. It featured one of my favorite girls, Shenhe, and that's when I came across this scene. Now, first of all, Shenhe's Lantern Rite skin is just incredibly beautiful. It features so many skills, techniques that I've always wanted to try, and I just loved it aesthetically. But then when I saw this adorable heart-to-heart scene between Cloud Retainer and Shenhe, I just knew I had to make this costume. So to start, I'm going to be making an underbust corset. For my corset, I'm using a pre-made pattern. This one is the Anna by Arnea Black. If you don't know who Arnea Black is, she's somebody who used to post a bunch of free resources, tutorials, and guides on the internet. You can still find some of her resources available. I got mine from r/corsetry, which I'll be leaving a link in the description below. I'm making a muslin mock-up first, just so I can adjust it to my size and needs. The main reason why I'm making an underbust for this costume is mostly just for waist reduction and support. I don't have Shenhe's amazing tiny waist and hourglass figure, so hopefully this will help me out in the end. So I've got my mock-up pieces cut out here in muslin, but I've made sure to note the underbust line, the waistline, and the high hip, and made sure to use registration marks so that when I sew this, it'll line up. Now I'm just going to do a straight stitch for this, but I'm going to set my stitch length to the longest so I can do a basting stitch around the perimeter. Alright, so now we've got the completed mock-up. I didn't have a busk on me right now, but this is the seam line where I'm going to be adding the busk. But I'm trying it on and I think the length is alright. This is right where my high hip is, so that's correct. This is on my waistline. The problem is I think size F is a little bit too big for me, because when I try to pull it really taut, it does overlap a bit. About one whole panel. So when I try to bring this seam together, like see if I can get rid of that last panel right there, it pretty much matches, and I think I will be fine with a Modesty panel if I add that as well. So right now, I'm just thinking about possibly modifying this panel right here, 7, so that this seam line is straight like here, and then just getting rid of the 8th panel. So I'll be using a total of 14 instead of 16 panels. Hello, Editing Sai here. While I did adjust the pattern to make it smaller, I also kind of forgot the game plan that I made up in the last clip, so if the pattern looks different, that's the reason why. So what I've done here is I've cut up piece 7, so I'll get rid of this, and then just so I can match or add this seam shape here to piece number 8, because I do need these grommets here. What I made sure to do first is to measure how wide this waistline is here, so I can transfer that length using the seam gauge onto this piece. Alright, so this is the second version of the mock-up. Aside from Frankensteining panels 7 and 8 together to get this new piece, I also went ahead and shortened panel 1. I basically did the same thing, but I just cut panel 1 in half and then moved the center seam over a little bit. It's a little bit uneven on the mock-up, but it'll do for now. So when I put it together, obviously my hands will not be able to replicate what it's going to actually look like when I'm wearing it, but I think this has the fit that I like. What do you guys think? I think this is going to be the final version I'm going with. Alright, so I've gone ahead and I cut out all my pieces. I've got a cotton broadcloth, 100% cotton broadcloth for my lining. I've got both a mixture of canvas and twill for my strength layer. So I'm going to have canvas for the panels that are going to be in the front and the back of the corset. And then I've got just plain twill for the side panels. And then for my fashion layer, I'm just going to be using white linen. I'm using this white linen just because it's going to match the undergarment pieces that I'm making that'll go over the top of this corset. Alright, so now the next thing I need to do is roll pinning. So I've got these 2 hams here to help me out with that. I've never attempted roll pinning before, but hopefully it'll be alright. If you've never heard of roll pinning before, it's basically a technique of pinning your 2 pieces of fabric together on a curved surface rather than a flat. And this is because this is going to go into a corset which wraps around your body, which is curvy. Lucy's Corsetry has a really good video explaining this. So because I want the fashion layer on the outside of my shell and my ham is curved this way, I'm going to have the linen on the bottom, because when I'm wearing this, it would be curved into my body like this. As I'm roll pinning, I stretch out the fabric pieces as much as I can, but I know that the seam lines won't match because they're laid on a curve. However, I try my best to match up the waistline notches because that's the most important area of the corset to me. Alright, so I finished roll pinning this first piece. So you can see that when I hold it up, it's already got a nice curve to it. So you can see how just pinning it alone has given it so much shape, it doesn't lay flat on the table anymore.
Land trip 1. Well, they got Garfield slippers. Oh, we should. Little guy Sonic. Hot dog. Skibbity toilet.
Alright, so I've gone ahead and flatlined the strength layer to my linen fashion layer, and now I'm going to be piecing these all together. Flatlining is basically taking your two pieces and stitching them together, but only in the seam allowance. That way in the final product, you don't get to see those stitches at all. Flatlining gives the same result as fusing two pieces of fabric together. Once I've got the panels all sewn up, it's time to press and steam them. I like to use a spray bottle because it gives me more control on where I'm applying water. Alright, so I finished sewing together my outer shell and my inner shell. So now what I'm doing is installing a waist tape. So for my waist tape, I'm just using grosgrain ribbon, and I've got a lighter here to just singe the ends. My waistline for this corset is about 26 inches total, so about 13 inches on each side. So I cut out a strip of ribbon that's a little bit longer than that, and I'm just going across and pinning these. I'm just going across and pinning these to the seam allowance of each piece, and then I'm going to baste, I think by hand for this, baste it down, and then when I actually install the boning channels for the bones, that will completely sew down the waist tape. Did y'all know that like this little pepper attachment on these things is like filled with little like beads for you to sharpen your needles with? I didn't know till now, but you just poke your needle through and it sharpens it over time. Here's a clip of the waist tape completely basted in. Waist tape is really helpful for keeping your corset super snatched, while also relieving tension on your seams. I'm sewing down strips of twill tape to act as my boning casing. And with those installed, my waist tape is sewn in without any visible stitches on the outer shell. The boning I'm using is called spiral steel boning. It's super strong but also very flexible. I'm using a 1/4 inch width. Alright, so now I've got all my boning installed on my lining, my inner shell here. The only boning I'm missing is the two strips that'll encompass the grommets on the back panel. But now that I have them in, it's time for me to install my bust. There's two sides to the bust. All I know is when I'm wearing my corset, I want this part with the loops on my right side and this part with the knobs on my left side. So let's install the loop side first. I've basically traced my seam allowance for when I attach this outer shell to the lining inner shell. But what I've done, instead of sewing all the way down, is I've marked out where the loops lie here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna stitch down here and I'm gonna back stitch, skip, and do the same thing. Once that's done, I'm going to go over it at least one more time with a different stitch length, just to make sure it's really, really strongly stitched there, because this is going to be a lot of tension and pulling on the busk, and I don't want this seam to rip at all. The seam is sewn and I've inserted the loop side. I've also pressed the heck out of the busk, and now what's left is to sew along the other side, taking care to avoid hitting the busk and breaking my needle. I've switched to a zipper foot to help make this process much easier. Once that's done, I'm going to sew over that stitch one more time, but with a different stitch length. This helps to really strengthen that stitch and keep the busk in place. To install the knob side of the busk, I'm going to sew the outer shell and inner shell right sides together. Then I'm going to mark out where I want the strip to go, making sure I mark where the knobs are and that they line up with the loop side. Once that's done, I'm going to poke holes where the knobs will sit. I don't have an awl, so I just used a closed pair of scissors. I'm in the camp that doesn't believe in punching or cutting a hole, but rather poking a hole through. After that, I can insert the knob side of the busk, apply fray check like crazy to the holes, and sew down the other side like I did with the loop side of the busk. Alright, I've got my bones in, and I've got my busk in. But there's one thing that I forgot to do before I put my busk in, which is, drum roll please, flossing the ends of my boning channels. So what flossing is basically taking this DMC embroidery thread, and I have some here already open and left over from when I made my corset for Mima, and I'm just going to be doing some decorative stitches or choice stitches on each end of each boning channel. Before I started flossing, I made sure to press every single seam in the corset. Because my corset has 8 panels on each side, that's 18 bones excluding the 4 bones on the grommet back panel. That's a total of 36 boning ends that need flossing. I'm using 3 strands of thread at a time. There's tons of different styles you can do and some are super pretty, but I'm going for functionality. The aim of flossing is to keep your bones from bending away from your fabric or poking through. I wanted to show you how long it takes for me to do one of these flossing ends, but it takes a few minutes, so I sped it up to 5 times speed. I think getting them to look super neat as possible is so worth it though. With the flossing completed, it's time to install some grommets. 2 pairs of bones are on each side of the rows of grommets. This is to reinforce the back panels. But basically what I did is I just sewed up this seam here, turned this entire thing inside out, and then just sewed a 1/4 inch boning channels here and left a little about 1/2 inch gap here. These are going to be for where all my grommets go. And then I just sewed together the top and the bottom hems. And now all I need to do left is add the grommets to both sides of the corset and then add bias binding, and then this thing is wearable and done. I've used a bias tape maker like this to make some custom bias tape. I have bias tape myself, but I just wanted it in this nice cotton broadcloth that I have. I sew down one side of the bias tape as usual, then whip stitch the other side by hand. With that all done, I can install my grommets. And before I can lace everything up, the very last thing I need is a modesty panel. My modesty panel is just 1 layer of cotton broadcloth and 1 layer of linen, sandwiching a sheet of plastic mesh canvas. So this is plastic mesh. It's basically just used for like cross stitch artwork. It's also still stiff enough to hold itself up without the need to add any boning. All right, so now to make the lace, I'm just taking some ribbon. I've singed the end to keep it from fraying. And once I've got it rolled to about as tight as I would like it to be, this is to make it really, really thin, I'm just gonna wrap it in tape. And so this is gonna act like a little aglet, like you would have at the end of a shoelace. So much easier to lace through the loops, and it's also gonna make it so much easier to lace through the grommets. All right, so that concludes the making of this underbust corset. This is my 2nd corset ever, so while it's not perfect, I'm still pretty proud of it. Now this corset is a part of my costume for my ALA entry. Just a few days ago I found out that I did get in, so that's very exciting. Stay tuned to see how I make the shorts, the undergarment, top, and the rest of the costume. If you made it this far to the end of the video, please let me know. Thank you, I really appreciate it. Let me know what you think about the corset. Do you have any questions? Are you working on a project right now? I hope to document the rest of my progress on Shenhe, so please subscribe and leave a like if you want to see more. Have a great day, y'all. Bye-bye.